She was the first woman in Western storytelling to kill a man in cold blood, and artists have been painting her doing it for centuries. Beautiful and pious, loyal to her people, yet entirely capable of murder. Judith's contrast may be the reason why so many artists have told their own stories through her skin. In this video, I've gathered over 500 years of extraordinary artworks depicting Judith. Together, we'll spot the patterns artists never stop repeating and explore why the figure of Judith remains one of the most irresistible psychological archetypes in art history. From a devout widow in rough sackcloth to a daring femme fatale, Judith has been reimagined across the centuries. Each portrayal is unique, yet the scene is always bound by the same chilling elements. A woman, a sword, the severed head of a man, and almost always a maid standing close by. In this video, we'll move through 3 acts, each set in a different time period, matching Judith's story with chosen artworks that reflect how each era saw her. The story of Judith is a biblical tale set in the ancient land of Israel during a time of war and siege. The Jewish city of Bethulia is surrounded by the Assyrian army, led by the fearsome general Holofernes. Fear spreads and talk of surrender grows louder. In the midst of this despair stands Judith, a young widow who lived a simple life of fasting and praying. She is deeply devoted to God and fiercely loyal to her people. As leaders falter and hope spreads, Judith steps forward with a daring plan. She will walk into the enemy's camp and return with the salvation of her city. It's clear to see that in the earliest depictions, from the Middle Ages to the Renaissance, she is presented as this saintly figure that emerged to save an entire city. In these scenes, the act has already been committed or is about to happen, but the common denominator is that she is shown as the victor over injustice, a biblical heroine. As her story began to circulate more widely, she also became part of a powerful artistic current known as the power of women. This theme celebrated and sometimes warned against female figures who used intelligence, beauty, or courage to overcome men. Delilah, Salome, Phyllis, and of course Judith. So let's begin our visual journey with this fantastic bronze sculpture created by the Italian Renaissance artist Donatello. This sculpture was commissioned by Cosimo de' Medici as a decoration for the garden of the Palazzo Medici between 1457 and 1464. Judith stands powerfully over the almost lifeless body of Holofernes. She holds him by the hair and wields the sword in a gesture charged with anger. But her face does not reflect the same emotion. Instead, we sense the pain that this horrible act causes her. She is suffering too. Artists in this period often chose blue for her garments, a color deeply associated with purity, the Virgin Mary, and divine favor. This was not just a fashion choice. It visually aligned Judith with the highest moral authority in Christian art, underscoring that her act was not out of personal vengeance, but divine mission. This Andrea Mantegna's Judith and Holofernes is a clear example. This pyramidal composition painting is from the year 1490. Judith, at the center of the scene, dressed in blue garments, is hiding Holofernes' head in a delicate manner. Everything is painted in the sublime detailed way of the Quattrocento. The tent, the clothes, the faces, the floor. Everything in this painting is so perfectly arranged. Let's not forget, this is supposed to be a murder scene. But here, the act is already done. The tension dissolved. Looks like nothing happened. She is not an assassin, but a holy vision. Now, this depiction by Sandro Botticelli is one of the few chances that we get to see her returning to her city as the victor. Return of Judith to Bethulia is from 1470. She walks with quiet grace, again dressed in blue. The head is hidden in a basket. Violence here is erased in favor of a dignified walk. Even Michelangelo in the Sistine Chapel carves her into the ceiling's grand narrative as a symbol of divine justice, dressed in blue, escaping quietly with the head hidden and invisibly. But things started to slightly shift towards late Renaissance, a change described as a fall from grace. From an image of Mary, she turns into an Eve. In Giorgione's Judith from 1505, Giorgione shows the heroic instance, the triumph of victory by Judith stepping on Holofernes' severed, decaying head. But the emblem of virtue is flawed, for one bare leg appearing through a special slit in the dress. This dress evokes erotism, indicates ambiguity, and is thus a first allusion to Judith's future reversal from Mary to Eve, from warrior to femme fatale. Then later Renaissance artists like Lucas Cranach the Elder, who with his workshop painted at least 8 Judiths, showed a more sexualized Judith, a seducer assassin. The very clothes that have been introduced into the iconography to stress her chastity become sexually charged as she exposes the gory head to the shocked but fascinated viewer. Let's continue with the story from where we left. Judith lives the safety of Bethulia and walks towards the enemy camp, dressed not in sackcloth, but in her finest garments. When she arrives at the Assyrian camp, the guards led her straight to Holofernes. She tells him a story that her people are doomed, that she can help him take the city without a fight. Intrigued, Holofernes welcomes her into his camp and offers her hospitality over the next days. But one night, the general drinks and eats heavily until he fades into drunken sleep. The tent is quiet and Judith acts quickly. She takes his own sword and severs his head. The salvation of her city is now in her hands. The story of Judith had moved far beyond its biblical origins. Around the 1600s, images of Judith began to take on a more violent character, and Judith became a threatening character to artists and viewers. 16th and 17th century artists found her tale to be the perfect subject for a technique called chiaroscuro. This technique uses a strong contrast between light and shadow to create volume and give a sense of depth in the figures. Using this technique made everything seem more dramatic and intense, which was perfect for depicting the scene of the beheading. In the darkened tent of Holofernes, chiaroscuro became the stage. To me, Caravaggio's Judith beheading Holofernes is the defining example of this period. Brutal, unflinching, and really intimate. Judith holds Holofernes by the hair. She steps back slightly but cannot bring herself to regret her actions. Her young face shows revulsion and horror. We morbidly witness how Holofernes was still alive while being beheaded. Artemisia Gentileschi went even further. She is one of the greatest, of course. In her own Judith slaying Holofernes, painted around 1620, the moment is more physical, more forceful. Judith is not horrified. She is completely committed to her act. You can feel and see the effort she is making, the gesture of determination on her face. Artemisia's own biography bleeds into the canvas. For her, Judith was not just a biblical figure. She was an embodiment of female resistance and vengeance. And finally, let's look at a different example from this period, but I wanted to mention this painting especially because it also reflects the personal story of the artist. In this case, Cristofano Allori, whose Judith with the head of Holofernes is less about the kill and more about Judith. We see her at the center of the scene. Elegantly dressed, her face is that of a very beautiful woman, sword still in hand and the man's head still clutched. This painting reveals a little of Allori's personal history because the head is actually a portrait of himself and Judith's face is that of his former lover. So far, we have seen a woman, a sword, and a man's head. But have you noticed another recurring element? So before we move into Judith's fully transformation into a femme fatale, we need to talk about someone who often goes unnoticed, but without her, the story doesn't work. Abra, Judith's maid, is far more than a background figure. In the book of Judith, she is her confidant, her co-conspirator, and the one who hides Holofernes' head to smuggle it out the camp. Sometimes she stands behind Judith, holding a sack and waiting. Other times she is right there in the act. Her inclusion signals that this is not a lone act, but a shared mission, a silent pact between women. But it's funny to see how Abra disappears completely once the story shifts towards portraying Judith as a solitary seductress. The maid no longer fits the narrative. Okay, final chapter. The final chapter of Judith's visual history take us into modernity, where the story's ending becomes the perfect launchpad for her transformation into an archetype, the dangerous, alluring woman. After the beheading, Judith returns to her city with Holofernes' head, the ultimate proof of her triumph. But in 19th and 20th century art, the fascination shifts. What grips artists is not only what she did, but how she did it. Judith's deadliest weapon was never the sword. It was her beauty, her composure, and the quiet confidence with which she carried both herself and the head. The elegance of her dresses grows richer, her gaze more direct, her skin more exposed. In Gustav Klimt's Judith first, the beheading itself is invisible. Instead, we are locked in her eyes. We are locked in the eyes and in that expression in her face. Is it pleasure? Is it relief? What is this face? It's an ambiguous face. Her cheeks are flushed, perhaps from the tension of the moment, and Holofernes' head is pushed to the shadows, nearly forgotten in that corner. We are not here to judge her. We are here to admire her. In his Judith II, she is painted in profile, her beauty heightened, draped in deep blue garments. The head is still present, but Judith is the moment. Judith's character was also put in a curious battlefield. I was shocked when I found out about this painting. Russian artists Vitaly Komar and Alexander Melamid, painters, sculptors, and conceptual artists, were known as underground figures who subverted the political and cultural systems of their native Soviet Union. Their 1997 work, Judith on Red Square, depicts a young girl as Judith, her face hidden in shadow, holding the decapitated head of Stalin. Here, the beheading becomes political theater. And from political revolution, she also was seen in cultural revolution, as she reappears in 2012 through the work of Kehinde Wiley, who depicts her as a powerful black woman, dressed in blue, holding a head modeled by an assistant to the artist. The work is inspired by Giovanni Baglione's Judith and Holofernes from 1608. In these modern visions, it's clear that Judith is no longer bound by her biblical origins. She becomes an enduring psychological archetype, beauty and brutality in perfect balance, the perfect woman and the perfect killer. Tracing Judith's image is like watching history paint its own reflection. Each period reshaped her, from Holy Widow to femme fatale, revealing more about the artist and their time than about Judith herself. And maybe that's exactly the point. Her story never really ends because every generation found a new reason to paint her again.